Hi, everyone, and welcome to Subsistence Crop, a podcast cultivated by the Cannabis Studies Lab at Cal Poly Humboldt, where we talk about human-cannabis relationships beyond commerce and prohibition.
Welcome to Subsistence Crop, the podcast of the Cal Poly Humboldt undergraduate Cannabis Studies major.
Honored to be here. How cool. Congrats.
Thank you. Well, your radio show, which is to me also a podcast, has been, since we started speaking several years ago around Santa Cruz history and legacies in Santa Cruz, has been a fantastic learning, opportunity for anybody who listens to it, as well as it's given me a lot of inspiration in terms of, how I think about how to talk to people and interview people around the subject of legacy cannabis genetics, because you have that passion for it and that knowledge, and you have these great guests, and pretty much no matter what their actual subject is, it always comes back to like legacy and community, right?
Yeah, big time. Yeah, I felt really honored when I moved here, in 2008. I just was kind of taken in by a lot of legacy people, operators, like Val Corral kind of came up. I recently interviewed Mike Corral, which is kind of fascinating to hear the other half of the WAMM story, right? Because that's co-founders. They were married for so long. They went through the raids with the DEA and the whole legal, experience they had with the federal courts and beating the feds in federal courts. So yeah, it's been kind of just authentic. It's a truly Santa Cruz story. Santa Cruz cannabis in Santa Cruz is, I've had some people on that were connected to Dave Watson, Sam the Skunk Man, learning the original skunk genetics. Some of the, this other person named Wayne, who's from Corralitos, came to a grand opening. My band played a grand opening in Watsonville, and there were some of these legacy, what would you call them? Like stewards of the seeds of the original skunk, the Grandpappy skunk, some people that knew the Hayes brothers. So it's just been an honor, and connecting with people like Michael Freitas of Coastal Seeds and a lot of these kind of land race preservationist people that are very passionate about holding on and preserving and seed increasing some of these rare lines that, because we live in this Mediterranean climate in the Santa Cruz Mountains. I'm here in Bonnie Doon, right by the UCSC, where they have an arboretum where they have plants from every continent except for Antarctica. So we're really lucky, just geographically and historically, to be here, the keepers of the seed, home of the Hayes. And this is something that I think a lot of my Humboldt friends, they know about Santa Cruz, but they don't really know about Santa Cruz. They don't understand how early Santa Cruz was in on the breeding in particular, like the self-conscious breeding, going on in the 60s, and the development of these communities of people who are just these cannabis nerds, that love the botany of it and the science of it. And, it was such a fertile ground, especially, I think, because of the university and its attitudes about it at that time, which were open. And this general kind of, when those undergraduates got the right to vote, basically in 71, they started electing these just left-wing city councils and so forth that for decades, had Santa Cruz in this really unique position, I think, counterculturally. Yeah.
At the same time, in the 80s, Santa Cruz got obliterated, I think, more by enforcement than say Humboldt did, right? I mean, it was hitting hard everywhere.
Yeah.
But people went more underground, right?
Very underground. Yeah, unfortunately, yeah. It was it was unfortunate. And I think part of it too pivoted to the importing. Because things were so hot. There was this moment in the 70s. I recently had some old editors at High Times, Steve Bloom. Yeah, Steve Bloom is a really interesting fellow. And then Malcolm McKinnon was, and he would go to these cultivation sites that were like war zones, truly, as a result of the campaign against marijuana planters, they were, it was really scary times. And so I feel like Santa Cruz and Northern California kind of they pivoted and brought in some of these imports. Tim Blake was a high school student, SoCal High, doing, getting kilos off of Italian fishermen boats in the Monterey Bay, and spoke to that of the Begonia Festival in Capitola and selling lids at SoCal High. And so there was that moment of like, just trying to like survive the intense, the 70s were a beautiful time because there was this moment, maybe even the High Times editors I've spoken to, where they thought it would happen federal, and then it kind of backfired with Nixon. And that was kind of like part of the Santa Cruz story too. We had ups and downs with our leaders. I think that's a very much a metaphor too for what we're experiencing now in modern cannabis, and kind of like ebbs and flows and peaks and valleys in our confidence, like for Gavin Newsom and decriminalized nature movement, and him to veto some new bills that were trying to provide access. It's just fascinating to see the one step forward, two step backward, that prophetic word of the Rasta man in reggae music. We're just always in a Babylon. But then these things are part of the story. It's part of like what these endeavors we do with these conversations is to preserve that, and especially I do look at making lemonade out of lemons, and providing funds for the work you guys are doing is so important, and to preserve the cultural history, and thinking about genetics specifically is very important.
Right, because the work we're doing is not really just about the genomics and the plants, about the stories. It's about the communities. I was just on the phone with Mojave Richmond. I don't know if you know Mojave. A couple of days ago, him and Rob Clark were actually driving around Santa Cruz for Croptober.
Yeah.
Smelling the flowers basically. And they caught wind of of our grant, which I want to emphasize is not just the function of me and what I did, but our team. And I work, I work for them and with them, not, they're not working for me, even though, technically I'm the PI. It's a horizontal team. And they got wind from Kevin Jodrey, basically was talking about it. He's in Pakistan right now making a documentary.
Right. Yeah. He's pretty beautiful with that beard he's got.
Yeah, so he fits right into he blends right in. I was actually like, what's up with this beard? Like in August, but I didn't say anything. And then I realized, oh, he's blending in.
Yeah, I was wondering about that as well. But I think it's when in Rome, do as the Romans.
That didn't have no plan. But it's funny because, Douglas Fir, basically, who I don't know if you know Douglas, but he's one of the Southern Humboldt back-to-landers that in 1979 went to Pakistan, right near where Kevin is now, and brought back like 5 kilograms of seeds. And then that actually was there were many people who did that, but like that was had a pretty big effect throughout the region, because he went around, Johnny Appleseeding it. And so he reached out to Kevin, and he was like, Kevin, you're going to be where I got these seeds from that I think are in a lot of the, watershed genetics. And he's like, please see if you can bring back the landrace, and maybe we can start to do some genomics comparisons to see, how much of that may or may not still be in there.
Amazing. How cool. Yeah, it's so important to when we have these opportunities to leverage our network and hopefully connect the dots there. I am unsure. There's a breeder in the Santa Cruz Mountains here, Bodie, and Bodie Seeds used to do these treks. He would bring heirloom food crop seeds and trade with the indigenous peoples of Oaxaca, or go to India, or these different, regions in the Middle East as well. And, at least he was trading food for ganja seed. But you see these YouTube videos of the strain hunters and the green seed group, and they kind of just adulterate and, indigenous lines and then unfortunately the natives don't really know any better, right? They're like, oh yeah, hey, sounds great. We want to grow what people know. And and it just muddies the gene pool, and it's a shame. It's tricky.
And there are, practical problems with that too, right? Because, when you hybridize those seeds, you produce plants that were not bred for that landscape.
Well said.
And you're gonna, you're actually disrupting potentially their, ability to produce. I've been hearing a little bit from some folks at Zomia Seeds over in Southeast Asia. That's, in that area, like there's been much less of that kind of penetration of the Euro North American hybrids.
Yeah,
because they just don't grow there. And
yeah, there you go.
like just not work,
yeah, that's one way of preventing the infiltration of Dutch genetics. Yeah,
right. Well, okay. Let me, just because you bring that up, let me ask you, okay, what do we even mean by Dutch genetics, right? Because Amsterdam was this crossroads.
Yeah, it was.
That had, our Santa Cruz brethren, right? That were over there, Dave Watson, Rob Clark.
That's right.
And then also, an international kind of land race hunting that was going on even back then. So, what do we even mean, I guess, broadly speaking, when we're thinking about the genetics that came back from Amsterdam, I guess, in the 90s?
Yeah, that's a good thing that's interesting. Yeah, I think that the research of the tolerant policies of the city of Amsterdam and just the Dutch people in general, I feel like it was the Mellow Yellow was the first coffee shop, the first place where there was an impetus to bring cannabis out of the street drug culture and facilitate a brick and mortar kind of community vibe, a third place, not your home, not your job, but a place to go, build culture and have access to cannabis. And that kind of blossomed into this tolerant cannabis gray area that is Amsterdam. And we've all pilgrimaged. I was lucky to go in 2019 when we went to Europe, and was pretty impressed with just the experience. It's a beautiful city just in general, and the art and the history and the Reich, is it the Reich Museum and Van Gogh, and we did all this fun. It was in the winter too, so there was the Festival of Lights and the canals, and the boat guide let me drive the boat so he can drink wine with the girls I was with. It was fun. We had a wonderful time. But when I think of Dutch genetics, I feel like it's like a terpenoline. I feel like it's just there's a certain flavor profile, there's a certain terpene profile. And unfortunately, for example, with Sam the Skunk Man in Santa Cruz, there was a raid, and he left Santa Cruz, but he did stash his seeds, and he went to Europe. And I think a lot of the hazes and a lot of the skunks that became the Sensi Seed Bank and all these big Amsterdam seed companies were built on the foundation of stewards in Santa Cruz, South County, Corvallis area, and also all over Northern California. But I feel like Santa Cruz specifically is a very special epicenter of innovation. And there was, because of our unique terroir, I would say, we have mountains meeting the sea. The Santa Cruz Mountains and some of the redwood forests of Henry Cowell provide interesting microclimates and areas to cultivate clandestine, for domestic production, not just the Monterey Bay and the import of, kilos from all over the world. But we had these little nooks and crannies in this mountainous part of the Santa Cruz Mountains that provided these opportunities to breed equatorial varietals that wouldn't mold, but also bringing in some of the, like you mentioned, Pakistan or Afghani. And that was kind of the impetus of creating these original haze lines, or even that skunk, the original Grandpappy skunk was a combination of these super equatorial varietals with trying to shorten the growth period via a more broadleaf kind of Middle Eastern from the Kush Mountain Range, which could be Afghanistan or Pakistan. And, it's those genetics, kind of like you said, it was a crossroads because of that tolerant nature and that pioneering of mellow yellow and the first coffee shops. But in my experience, a lot of the lines kind of were, it's not a great sun growing region, Amsterdam or the Netherlands.
It's all indoor breeding.
It's all indoor breeding. That's part of the situation there is you don't really have a semblance of some of the best cannabis, in my opinion, comes from these rugged areas in the Middle East or in California. In these, Santa Cruz has challenging parts to it. We have a marine layer where things will just mold overnight, like 100% humidity. I grew 7,200 plants for WAMM last year. And in South County, it was blown away. It was like James and the Giant Peach where the rhino comes and like all the clouds behind it. Like as soon as that sun sets, we have like just 100% humidity, just water everywhere. And when those, an acre of buds is blooming, it's a mold fest. And so, you know what I mean? It's like they have these natural rites of passages. And so the lines that are bred in these areas have this natural affinity and kind of develop these survivability traits. But when you're growing all indoor all the time and you're kind of facilitating all of this kind of mashup, it's like when I have a toddler and you give her enough colors, you start mixing enough colors, it all becomes brown, poo-poo, or black.
Yeah.
So in some ways, that's the metaphor of some of the Dutch seed lines that I think of as like the strongest sesquiterpenes, that piney amnesia haze profile, or some of these citrus varietals kind of just dominate and kind of muddy the unique, chartreuses and colors in the color wheel that are the rare kind of unique lines that were developed in these different areas. For example, like Pakistan or the Santa Cruz Mountains in South County, the haze work or the skunks. And so that unnecessary, practice that they were trading those Dutch genetics to like rare land races like the Punta Oroja in Colombia or the, Swazi in the bush. It kind of is just a heartbreaking, almost like, I don't know. It's like,
it's neo-colonialist.
I was just about to say that. Yeah, I didn't want to get too political, but yeah.
You can't.
I'm sure there was an element to that. Like, and no one else will have it. And so let's muddy the waters and yeah, you're right. You're absolutely.
This is very interesting because in talking about specific places, we've actually stumbled upon, I think, an interesting topic around the development of genetics that is actually about really like indoor and outdoor selection and breeding. And so like the early breeding in Santa Cruz was happening in a context of, largely outdoor selection, like can this grow well here? And in the process, these flavor profiles that got developed, like skunk number one, which that's what people are looking for now, is they can't get the exact DNA. What they're looking for is that flavor profile, right? Mm-hmm. But, in every attempt to get back to that, like it's all happening like indoors, right? So, but that's going to affect what the possible flavor profiles are. So there's cul-de-sac.
Yeah. No, it's that nature versus nurture. And sometimes I feel like some of the best things that can happen are the happy accidents of a sun-grown full-term season. And when you have controlled environments, by default, it's going to kind of, you're kind of in this like cycle of maybe the cultivator or the breeder or the selector, will select for specific traits, whether it be phenotypes. We're in this weird time in the market where we're kind of just, running in the cycles of candy terps and purple gas phenos and gelatos and cookies and papayas. And I think Rob Clark and Mojave were at a farm that I'm very familiar with, the J Nectar Collective in Santa Cruz, and they grow only land race, only full term, and a lot of their medicine or products that are on the market are hyper local infusions of like olive oil from the area, and land raised cannabis to produce THCA rich profiles. And I think like some of those things that we're looking for, these minor cannabinoid or mixed ratio profiles or rare terpenoids, or the other thing that's interesting is, like you mentioned, the skunk and that kind of like garlic profile or acrid. We're learning with a recent white paper that just came out that it may not even be terpenes. It's these secondary compounds that are, so it's fascinating to think about this, and that, maybe as, the product of adapting and the low stress training of intense humidity or wind or clay in the soil, produce these rare secondary compounds that produce that profile that we can't replicate in a controlled, nurtured, coddled indoor environment. There's something to be said about the roots and getting back to the roots. And I've kind of gone full circle. Obviously, with my show, I'm so passionate about the land race and the preservation and the regenerative agriculture movement and these wonderful conversations that really give me hope for the future. But then I also fall victim to, like, I want to produce a product that will sell, that people will recognize. And so I've sourced some indoor genetics and ran some clones, and just got humbled this year. Just like everything molded to the point of like it was outrageous how fast things would mold. And we had a weird gray May and June gloom, and then it got sunny in like July. So everything had a late start. We had that atmospheric river that half of Bonnie Doon washed down into the ocean. And so we're all kind of like humbled this year with the sun-grown cultivation. But what's doing the best in my garden after all this mold and all of this devastation? It's a Maui haze from Equilibrium Genetics. I have a Swazi haze that is just crushing. It's like everything that just wasn't flowering when everything molded is like this picture perfect, fold out from High Times magazine, like pink pistils, amazing resin, just chunking up. And
really veg during the bad weather.
That's it. Well, and there's something to be said. Like the things that I kind of literally I wasn't paying attention to, but I always have a spot in my garden for some rare, fun, equatorial sativas, whatever you want to call it. These, Jason Mathis of Equilibrium is a dear friend of mine. He has roots here in Santa Cruz. And so he sent me some like rare, some Hawaiian cross with this haze variety from Santa Cruz. And of course, it's thriving. It's the best plant. It's the queen of the garden. I neglected it. I barely water it. And it's like, thank goodness I did throw that out there, because it's going to be what head stash I have. Because everything else I was trying to do for production is now just, it's mold. It was gone. It's gone. So there's something to be said about, growing to your environment, and then also working with nature. And sometimes it's good to not have control, and allow the plant.
I want to just patent that statement. Like, sometimes it's good to just not have control.
I have control. And it's really.
I want to actually like translate that in an actual policy complaint that I have all the time, which is that, like, why can't your unique stuff get to the market? And it's because we don't have deli style. We don't have the ability to appreciate. The consumer has nothing to buy it off of except for the package and the numbers on the package.
Yeah.
Even if people have terpene percentage, like, there's other things going on. And so, like, I think that's policymakers are worried about, like, increasing THC, and yet, like, their policy makes it the only incentive, essentially for the market. It's like, what's the THC percentage? Or even just this fixation on numbers.
The fixation numbers. What I imagine these hazes, and having what I find, through my radio show, I had an operator that is operating 24 stores in California, and he wouldn't be the mom and pop operator that I would bring on, but because he was kind of collabing, there's a spirit of co-opetition right now in Santa Cruz. I imagine all over the nation, all over California too, because the market is so challenging.
And people have been humbled. Yeah.
It's just like the cost of compliance and it's just challenging. Like, the margins are so slim. So people, instead of competing, are coming together in a spirit of cooperation and building, collabs and brands that are, like, you have a cultivation and a manufacturing. I have prowess and SOPs in retail. Let's come together, and we're semi-vertically integrated by working together. And so it was interesting, though. The reason why I bring all that up is I learned from his feedback and from his data of all these stores all over the state that, you know, in COVID there was, and this is maybe why gelatos and runs started dominating the Emerald Cup, started dominating every sort of, you know, Instagram feed or wherever people are and wherever the cannabis culture goes. It was like a handful of lines that were being crossed back to each other, you know, runs to this and Skittles to that and cake to this and gelato to that, and cookie. And so, like, you know, that was kind of comforting when we were in that tough 2020, 2021, and then a transition in 22, and people started exploring new experiences, new terp profiles. And now he's saying, like, every SKU, instead of like going with what they know, they are trying something new almost every visit. And that there's a trend going that direction. And also there were trends away from like the heady, myrcene dominant, caryophyllene dominant, linalool dominant varietals that are like colloquially known as indicas,
Right.
just more like stimulating cultivars. People are looking for citrus, looking for haze, looking for jack, even like bringing back some of these bronchodilators, these like stimulating cultivars to go do things with and have experiences with and socialize. So I thought that was heartening. And I think that's part of this interesting progression of what dreams may come in the cannabis community. And there's a lot of opportunity. And if we explore landrace specifically, they have natural profiles of CBD with THC or minor cannabinoids that aren't really necessarily psychoactive, but that do provide a benefit to the endogenous cannabinoid system by stimulating, you know, different CB1, CB2 receptors. And then the other thing is this brave new world of the olfactory and the entourage effects with terpenes. And I think a lot of these rare landrace cultivars have the like parsnip profile, or, you know, these wild kind of vegetable, different flavors, not just gas, not just candy, but something new, something savory, something bright, something maybe not as high in THC too. I mean, the state should encourage diversity because it actually might provide a product that is balanced. It might be a 1-to-1 mixed ratio profile with
Exactly.
It's exciting.
So you heard about the cultivar that won Cannabis here in Humboldt this past month.
No, tell me about it. I saw Cannabis happening and I almost made a pilgrimage, but we have
16% THC. 16% THC was its number. It was year-old, full-term outdoor with just an awesome flavor profile.
I love
and I'd been actually getting samples of it because the Canna Country cultivator was dating my co-director at Himmer. And she was bringing me samples of it. And she's like, can't sell this because it's 16%. And I'm like, this is so good, though. This is what I want to smoke.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then like, then he won Cannabis with it. And it's just like out of the blue. I'm just like, of course, you know. So I was just super excited to see that development, you know. And I really think that, you know, it's good news for all of us. And I think potentially it's good news to start talking to like policymakers and regulators about like, if you're so afraid of high THC cannabis that you're pouring millions of dollars in research money into like something that is, you know, like it's flower, so it's really not that much of an increase. And also there's such a thing as like a lab inflation going on here. So like, I don't know how much of this is real.
Yeah.
Then like, you know, let's talk about your other policies that basically make it so the consumers, like, they don't get to experience something different. They don't get to try balanced cannabinoids. They don't get to try, you know, these flavor profiles. So I'm trying to kind of work with that a little bit. I'm more in touch with, you know, policymakers and regulators than I used to be, on account of this grant and some other things going on that you know, I don't want to actually pollute this particular conversation with those topics, but maybe that's another discussion to have sometime.
I'd love to, man. Wherever, I mean, the beauty of the show too, I meet someone new every week and have for every week since 2015. And I think we need more Dominic Corvas in the space talking to regulators, seriously, because it's unfortunate how many conversations I have with amazing stewards of the plant that feel so discouraged and disheartened that it's almost like out of their mind. It's just that they don't know how to begin or how to broach. Even legends like the matriarch of medical, like Val Corral, was just so frustrated to the point of like, fizzled. Like WAMM is barely anything now. It's a whisper. It's a memory. I was working full time for WAMM and put my heart and soul in a massive garden, and I don't even know if any of that flower made it to market because I had to get a new job this year because WAMM couldn't make payrolls. And that's just kind of like a sad sign of the times. For many that don't know, WAMM is potentially why we have Prop 215, which is one of the big contributors to why we have an industry in California.
I mean, you cannot overstate that, by the way. I think that, a lot of people know about Dennis Perone. They know about what's going on in San Francisco, but, Valerie and Mike were the huge parts of what happened with Prop 215.
Yeah. I mean, growing was not on the language at all until Mike and Val insisted, be like, no, you need to, we're not about this unless there's gardens, unless there's this ability to caregive, because that was what he was doing for her since they met in the 70s and her traumatic brain injury.
That's the legacy right there.
Well, yeah, that was the beginning. That was the idea. Yeah, the collective, the caregiving, the medicine. It was Prop 215. That was the essence of the mission, and that's why Lester Grinspoon said, there was only one truly compassionate collective, and it was.
Yeah, there's so much to that that's like, I wish that we collectively could even begin to address this like gap in public knowledge. And I think that, I would encourage anyone to read, Wendy Chapkus and Richard Webb's book, Dying to Get High. There was also a documentary about Valerie and Mike, La Vie en Vert, if I'm pronouncing it wrong, it's like a French name, but it's about the WAMM, hospice collective. I mean, it was sick and dying people. They were growing their own medicine, under supervision from especially Mike, and making their own medicine from what they grew, and they were able to come together in a garden, socially as they were dying, and then like in terms of therapeutic doesn't even begin to touch what that's like end of life, like gold standard, like what you would want, like I think at the end of your life is to not be sitting there in a bed, with like machines on you and nobody coming around, but to be able to be with other people, and especially because so many of those people have been stigmatized as, especially the HIV/AIDS patients, to be able to come together and laugh. These are the stories to me that are that legacy, like it's the plants, but also that joy that people could feel together. That is most clear, in a hospice collective, but is also something we all need in every part of our life at any given moment. I feel very passionately about this, and I'm sick to my stomach that the city of Santa Cruz fell down on the job. We brought them right to the edge. Here you are, just do the application, and they wouldn't apply for the equity grants, even though they'd been given the money, and my team had done the work to write an equity assessment that really honored that legacy. But I will tell you, like, we didn't even talk about Mike Corral back then. Like, and then listening to his interview takes me back to the plants as well, because like he's been apparently like, so he was a breeder,
big time. Talking about preservation. I mean, that interview really opened my eyes. I have it here. He provided me that it's kind of full circle. It's really timely that we're talking. Here is, I hope my blurring thing doesn't. This is shoot.
Backing up. There you go.
There we go. This is Rob Clark's. It's a photocopy of like the manuscript of his thesis for UCSC. Yeah. So pre-book. And it's really special because there's it's like typewriter. And then this is tough with the blur, but there's like Mike has notes in the margins. Mike
giving Rob on his
notes, where Rob gave a copy of it to Mike, and then Mike gave me a copy of his copy that he wrote his own notes off of Rob's work. So in many ways, it's like it's there. It's just like I hear, and obviously it's Rob, but then I see Mike learning from Rob in this copy, which is very special. And that was really sweet for him to share that with me. Because that's how I got him on the show. Is I think I shared a picture, a memory, some silly thing like from my phone said, "Oh, this day 5 years ago, you were with Rob Clark." Yeah. But it's a picture of him signing my like super tattered, marijuana botany book, and like keep growing, Chris, Rob.
Yeah.
And I shared that. Then Mike hits me up and he's like, "Hey man, I have like the pre-release of that and with my notes annotated on it. You want a copy?" And I was like, "You want to come on my show? Let's do this." And yeah, full circle. It was really cool. It was really cool. And he had rescheduled me a few times because he had COVID and was like really sick. He was kind of not feeling good. And so I was like, "You know what, Mike, it's all good." But because I was patient, he did come through with some really good joints and a really nice gift. And it's fun to read through it and to see, yeah, like you said, Mike, very passionate about breeding. He took that manuscript to heart, and then on the show shared that he's got all these rare Malawis and a lot of the WAMM genetics. He kept
WAMM genetics. Like this is the thing that like I would like to know more about and learn more about is that combination between like that breeding and that hospice garden, right? Like, how did the cultivar selection happen, for the patients in terms of what they found worked the best for them?
Yeah.
Like in addition to like the breeding and breeding logic that Mike was doing, I hope that perhaps with this grant we might be able to catch Mike, with an interview that maybe addresses some of that.
I think it would be good for Mike too, because he's by default laid pretty low, and then was doing projects abroad. Consulting Israeli cannabis researchers, consulting European groups. I feel like there's this medical movement piece happening in other countries that is kind of. That's what he was speaking to. I mean, he's been so frustrated with policy ever since Prop 215, let alone post Prop 64 era.
Right.
He's just kind of disheartened and over trying to make something work here, but kind of elsewhere, and felt like he was more effective in other places, other countries that are kind of starting. It's like Prop 215 in Poland or Israel, like things are happening in these other areas that he feels like he can have a bigger impact. But one thing he did share about, and the anecdotal like testimony from the show, but also being a part of WAMM and getting to know Leona and Douglas and some of the members and some of the board and like that you spoke to it really well. That everyone was involved. I think with post Prop 64 era, it's hard to have like volunteers. It's hard to have people come and, there's this whole accountability piece. There's the metric. There's all this, of course, that needs to be a part of a compliant system. But we kind of lost touch to the human aspect of the ethos of love grows here. And so what providing was a space to grow love, but also it was that cannabis connection to the patient, to the caregiver. I think a lot of what him and Valerie learned together was, what cultivars would help her and what things would help with her their seizures, and then that kind of just fractaled out into these other friends and into it becoming a collective, into having this bigger garden. I believe in Swanton.
You could not control that process.
No, it was so beautiful and organic. Yeah, exactly. No control. That's kind of WAMM. It is kind of like you're in this like wild space. I'm not sure if it's just the. I mean, that's a wild group.
It's a matter of like new forms of life can emerge out of uncontrolled conditions. Whereas like if you just control everything, nothing new will ever happen.
Yeah.
It's just like, I don't know. We've got to deal with this, control and maybe letting things go thing at a very high level, which is actually where I'm at right now, because you and I have been talking for about 45 minutes, and my students who have been tasked with going through your archives and creating and getting those stories. This is the part of the project where like it's archival research, right? You've been asking these questions and you've been talking to these people, and there's been other places that have, but like none as consistently as you really at Cannabis Connection. And so I'm like, okay, you guys, instead of just like scattered everywhere, like why don't we do the dive into Cannabis Connection? So, I've had my research assistants, and they just wanted to be here for this podcast hour. And, many of them are pretty eager to maybe jump on, say hi, and ask some questions. And, like we can figure out what happens in edits later or whatever. But I just want to give them a chance to talk to you for a little bit, if that's possible.
Yeah, 100%. Wow, what an honor, what a privilege. Thank you. Thank you.
Great, wonderful. Thank you. So I'm going to start over here with Cade Chapman to my right, and are you?
This mic is on.
Yeah, it's on.
Can you hear me? I don't think you can hear me on here. Can you?
Yes,
I can hear.
Okay,
yeah,
sounds good.
Yeah, you sound solid.
So he's not Jada Morrison.
I'm not.
Yes, and that's actually Jada Morrison right next to him right now. So
okay,
yeah. Take it away, guys. Got some questions or comments?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think just like to know a little bit more about you. Maybe what are some of your favorite genetics that you've grown that you can?
Wow. Wonderful. One that immediately cut like a gut reaction is there's a goji OG from Bodhi Seeds, a Nepalese landrace. I love the kind of Middle Eastern profiles. I love, for example, too, there's another landrace like California landrace or heirloom, the Big Sur holy weed, which theoretically I believe might be from Zacatecas, might be from Mexico. But yeah, I do enjoy some of those kind of like interesting, like spicy profiles. Me and my father grow together. So there's sometimes the most beloved genetics come as a result of the journey of cultivating that garden and that round, or you breed and keep going and work a line. And so I've worked a few lines with the Big Sur holy weed that is very special to me. There's a banana cultivar that was very special in Santa Cruz, and we put it to the Big Sur holy weed, and that is the Santa banana. So we just grow that for heads. That's just for my dad and I. It's like a special little rite of passage project, a life's work we've been doing together. And that goji comes to mind. There's a raspberry pheno we really like. Very interesting Nepalese landrace.
That's really cool. That's really cool that you mentioned the holy. Yeah, with a lot of. This is great.
Yeah, little banana helps with the flavors too.
That's sick.
And you guys feel free to jump in organically, but I can if you want. Just pop you around. I don't want to stop Cade, but I want to make sure everybody gets a chance to jump in.
Yeah. I just had a question. What do you think makes Santa Cruz unique in terms of the ongoing legacy of different cultivars? And can you recall any particular strains that stand out in the SC community?
I think when I first moved here, it was the birth of Blue Dream. So the Blue Dream is a Santa Cruz haze with the DJ Short. And I have, for example, my other love is reggae music. And so I just had him on kind of like coincidentally, he showed up. He's been on the radio for almost 30 years. DJ Daddy Spleece, he just had All Fruits Ripe reggae hour on KSCO. I think the community of UCSC, the city on the hill, makes it unique. I think what Rob Clark coming to UCSC at that era, the beginning of UCSC, was trying to build a university where there were no grades. there was kind of like almost an anarchy approach to education, and very hands-on, and you would evaluate yourself or evaluate your peers. We have this history of a very progressive climate of regulation and policy making. We are the birthplace of CCOF organic farms, the Chadwick Gardens, and some crazy amount of counterculture and rock and roll. I think Hunter S talks about coming, down from the city on a motorcycle for some crazy times. We also were the murder capital of the world for a while. So we've had like interesting ups and downs as a community. But when it comes to cannabis, I feel like part of that is tandem, the art, history, the kind of, in a way, organic cultivation and the kind of ruggedness of where these mountains meet the sea. The mystery spot, like there's some weird vibes just out in the woods out here in Santa Cruz. We have an amazing microclimate. We're the second smallest county in the whole state, but I think we have the most diverse populations of like bees and like some, amazing opportunities for flora and fauna. And I think that all kind of, went into the secret sauce of people taking imported cannabis from the Monterey Bay. I think that's also a part of it too, is we have this crazy underwater trench deeper than the Grand Canyon, some of the most interesting sea life and marine biology, and who knows what's at the bottom of that crevasse. But I know we know more about space than we know about the ocean, and so there could be something happening out there that's contributing to this. But I think in general, we have this wonderful counterculture art scene. I feel like we're a small town with a big city draw. Whether you're on tour from the LA to the Bay, a lot of people would come through Santa Cruz. And I think Neil Young's ranch is up here. Janis Joplin used to come to Henfreeze. We just have this really interesting geographical location. I think the Redwoods meeting the sea has a piece to that. And I think part of it was we just were a fertile ground for innovation. The Huey Newton and the Black Panther Party, Angela Davis. I took that major, the community studies major, as kind of like the legacy of some of the thought experience of the, of that community at that time. And so I think it all kind of adds up. And then of course, growing out in the Santa Cruz Mountains, it's just a beautiful place to be. And we had that proximity to, whether it be the Bay Area or San Francisco. But then, of course, I think a lot of people, like Tim Blake is, the founder of the Emerald Cup, and he moved to the Emerald Triangle. And I think a lot of people did that, and with the Back to the Land movement too. And so we have that connection to the Emerald Triangle as well. So it's kind of like a feedback loop, as we were providing seeds, they were providing pounds. I've had a lot of conversations with smugglers and people that were, bringing work from Northern California back down to the Bay Area and Santa Cruz. And it kind of was this interesting circle. We all helped each other out throughout Prohibition.
Awesome. Hi, Christopher. I'm Keegan. I'm actually, I grew up in Half Moon Bay.
Nice.
So, and my grandmother was like part of the second graduating class of Santa Cruz. So I have kind of a question, just asking you a bit more about like kind of surrounding counties, like Santa Clara and San Mateo being just a lot more stringent in regulations, especially comparatively to Santa Cruz. And historically, both of those places, especially along the coastline for like San Mateo County, like, going up on the unincorporated communities down there, there's been cultivation happening for decades. And then, going out 17, like into Lexington Hills, over 9 into like the Los Altos Hills, Saratoga area has also been like, had a lot of cultivation going on for a long amount of time. I think it's just really interesting that there's such a disparity nowadays. And I was wondering if you had any input on that, on why that might be, and kind of like your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I think in general, the cannabis community was so worried about the civic process that I don't know, to be honest. It's really challenging. I'm from a very conservative community that in Gold Country, that El Dorado County, that had a ban until this year, just outright banned. Yet the amount of cannabis grown in that community is comparative to Santa Cruz, comparative to Mendo. And so sometimes the policy doesn't reflect what's really going on with the people. And I think in general, a lot of cannabis stakeholders are really hesitant to get involved in local politics or the civic process, which I find is very unfortunate. And I think long term, in order to have responsive policy, we need leaders in the cannabis space to pursue or align with or educate regulators. I really commend the work of what you guys are doing with your university studies and of initiatives like what Dr. Corva is doing, and then of course the example pioneers like Val Corral and Mike Corral have set. I really commend them, and I think there needs to be more of that in the future. And it takes a village. All politics are local. I don't know why, but I can understand, coming from a very conservative Trump country county, that you can still grow a lot of weed and have, the antithesis happening in the Board of Supervisors chambers.
Yeah.
So it's frustrating because it doesn't reflect the values or the best practices or the livelihoods of the constituents. But the constituents have been very secretive, and that's a product of prohibition. And I think in many ways we're still dealing with the negative stigma, and we're still dealing with the wounds of the drug war. And in a way, it's Prohibition 2.0 now.
Yeah.
What's your history with the plant? When did your relationship with cannabis start?
I love that. I was really into the performing arts growing up. It was a wonderful outlet for me. I grew up in a very rural, grape growing, fruit growing kind of place, like very, very, very country bumpkin existence, Gold Country, Apple Hill. So I got into theater, and it was a way for me to kind of take my mind and my imagination to places, outside of this very sheltered place, very special place, wonderful childhood. But I always had ambitions to go and explore. And then in high school, I auditioned for there was like a festival at Sacramento State, which was like the big city. And I got a pretty big role in a one-act play. It was like a competition where all these groups would come together, and there were monologues and one acts. And I was a part of Oscar Wilde's Salome. I played the role of Joe Canaan, was like John the Baptist, kind of a heavy role. But I was 14 and my counterpart was 18. Everyone that got casted was 18 plus, or, like they were all seniors and I was a freshman. And they kind of hazed me and took me out one fourth period. And they said, "Hey, Chris, we want to have a cast meeting, a safety meeting." And I was just naive. And I was like, "Oh, safety. Yes, cast. Yes, of course." I was trying to fit in. I was trying to be cool. And so we got in the back of a pickup truck and drove out to these orchards. And that was my first experience. I tried some purple bud in a bubbler called Purple Haze. And that's how I earned my name Smiley, is I started smiling and I couldn't stop. And like it just, like everything just, woof. It's like I was hungry and I finally was fed. I experienced something that I had never really knew, that, like sensations and that elation, that euphoria really changed me. And so the rest of my tenure in high school, obviously I would do a lot of plays, and we would take a pilgrimage to Ashland, Oregon for the Oregon Shakespeare Festival once a year. And I was in charge of bringing the good flowers to Lithia Park, and we would go see some Shakespeare after having a safety meeting, a cast party. So that was kind of the inception. And one time we took a road trip to Santa Cruz. We had mutual friends with an older sister that was a dancer at Cabrillo Stage. And so I saw a dance recital at Cabrillo, and then was busking on Pacific Avenue. And we even slept on the beach here north on the Waddell Creek. And I just thought to myself, I'd like to find a way to come back here. And through playing music, I had a friend when I was 18, he was going on tour, and he's like, "I got a room." I'm like, where? I'm trying to get out of Placerville. And he said, "It's in downtown Santa Cruz, Beach Hill." It was around Christmas, and on January 1st, 2008, I moved to Santa Cruz. And one of the first jobs I got was making coffee at Lulu Carpenter's downtown, and I would trade espresso beans and leftover pastries to my plugs to get cannabis. And then eventually we got to know each other, and I started trimming for them, and I would chop my way to the top. And the way we paid for my band's first album was with funds we made trimming for all the info. Yeah.
That's so cool.
So that was kind of it. And I took care of the plant. The plant's taking care of me. And yeah, in 2014, we opened a dispensary, and I went on a radio show. And then the program manager at KSCO, that's been around in Santa Cruz for 75 years, said, like, I like the way you guys talk about cannabis. It's not a Cheech and Chong conversation anymore. Let's have more of that. And she gave me a primetime slot on Friday nights, and I've been doing that ever since. And even, like what Dominic was saying, it's become a podcast. I think a lot of our audience listens in their gardens, not live when we have our show, but they kind of that brings a more international audience too, to scale it out, Spotify and Apple and whatnot.
That is such a great story. I'm glad you asked that question, Cade.
It's cool, yeah. But it's fun to reminisce, yeah.
Well, it is a question that actually I ask my students as well.
Well, good. Did you?
Cool. Yeah, that because I also share, I try not to go on at super length, but like just want to get them comfortable with the idea that like there's a human plant relationship, right? And to think about it not just as like a commodity you consume, but like a socially valuable experience and relationship. And so it has been really great to hear the different stories about how folks relate to the plant and how they got started and where they're at now, because it's, for many, it's changed over time. For many, it's something that is very seriously medical. I think we have a number of students in our classes that are here because they already get it, because like they come from families or themselves have had that connection with like the plant as a healing force, and so it's really cool. Thanks for asking, Cade.
Well, I love it. I ask a lot of guests that too when we start a show, so I imagine it's familiar.
Great starting point.
It's a great starting point. I feel like it helps break the ice too. It's funny how some people are just naturals and some people are very nervous to talk about things, right? To come out of the cannabis closet a little bit. And
yeah, and I think we need to respect that, but also I think that like in general, move the dial so that people aren't afraid to talk.
Yeah, I think it's very important to emphasize that human-plant relationship. I think that's really well said, and it resonates. It makes a lot of sense.
Let me just cast out one more time for questions from folks. Jada?
Going off of that, just what made you decide to start a cannabis podcast as a forum for coalition building between activists and the community?
Wow. I think it naturally kind of snowballed to something that I followed my interest in wanting to learn and having an opportunity and a reason when I read something or heard of someone, like, for example, Robert Connell Clark. I found that book at the bookery in downtown Placerville when I was like 16, and it's been kind of traveling with me wherever I would tour. It's like, it's been with me for this whole time. And now when I have the opportunity to go on the radio show, it provided that kind of legitimacy or some sort of, it had a little gusto behind it. And so I would leverage it to be like, to have confidence and reach out, cold call someone like Robert Connell Clark and be like, hey, I have this radio show. Would you like to come on? And 9 times out of 10, they're like, sure, let's do it. Can I call in? Can I come in person? And then when it comes to like the advocacy piece, that was me being present on the floor running what was a medical collective, Kind People's Collective, and seeing, for example, the Santa Cruz Veterans Alliance started they're a pretty big brand now. They're a business, but they started as a couple guys with some really rough looking veterans that came in with them asking, since we had such a big dispensary, if they could go upstairs and just talk, have like a men's group, like just sit down and talk. And maybe, you know, if that was okay, then the next time they would come and say, hey, can we give away a few, you know, bags of weed? Or Big Pete's Treats gave us all these cookies. We want to give them out to these guys. And they said, you know, come here at this time because Smiley's the manager on these nights and we'll meet upstairs. And over time, you know, I got more involved learning about veterans, learning about patients. I met Valerie through the radio show, and then I got involved with WAMM more, volunteering in the community. We were part of a group called Community Prevention Partners that I was a co-chair eventually for. We're talking about youth and harm reduction and youth prevention. But part of it was also like educating people that misunderstood cannabis and then sitting at a table with them and talking about the people we were serving in these compassion programs or the opportunity to, you know, write policy. I had Dan Peterson, who was the manager, the cannabis licensing manager at Santa Cruz in the very early days. And then, you know, building a relationship with someone like that just opened my eyes to like, well, we can hopefully advocate for something that makes sense, and we can become more than just this kind of outlaw constituency. And so I tried to leverage that radio show as a platform to give voice to a voiceless group. And some of that I learned at UCSC through my studies at community studies and through some of the works and the people that came before me. And I was very honored to be a part of that. And I will be honest, I had good friends and role models and roommates. We started our band Ancestry in 2010. And a lot of the founders of that band were community studies. They were older than me. They were community studies alumni. And one went to Oaxaca and worked with all these indigenous peoples in Mexico. And, you know, I was just inspired by their stories and their service and their passion. And I poured that into the cannabis community. And then the radio show continued to just progress. And every time I talked to someone, I would learn about, like today, I've learned about Douglas fir. I have like 5 names here that I'm probably going to follow up with, and you'll hear shows on, or I'll talk to Dominic later, and we'll work it out. But yeah, it's just been something like a labor of love, like growing cannabis, like making seed and preserving seed. That's my life's work, and I'll just continue to do it. And even if there wasn't an industry, I would still be doing the show and still be growing and taking care of the plant, because it really has done so much for me. And I feel like there's so much more to learn. It's amazing how humbled you think you kind of know something, and then you just get completely humbled. And I love that. I love being a part of a community. We are having a lot of challenges. It's not a rosy thing like it was when we started in 2015. That was the green rush. Everyone was so excited, and everything was kind of like, it was kind of perverse how money-driven things were. And now it's so challenging. And to grow a big crop like I did last year and to not have a job at the end of it was like, wow, talk about humbling. But I was able to pivot, and it was actually through the radio show. Someone that I had on the radio show in 2017 offered me a job right when I needed it, when WAMM was collapsing. And so in a way, the radio show is like the plant. I've taken care of it, and it's taken care of me, and we'll just keep it going.
Can I ask who you were 2017? Because my research time for the Cannabis Connection podcast is 2017 to 2018. So I'm a little intrigued by that.
Oh, very cool. So there was a period where I didn't work for anyone but the plant. 2017 was the end of my tenure with Kind Peoples. We opened the Kind Peoples Collective in 2014, February. I was hired January 1st of 2014. We had like 30 days to open. And it was this big Ducati, like Italian motorcycle dealership that was just run down. So it was imagine a big space, but very dirty, very very not up to code. And so Santa Cruz is very rigorous with their codes, and it's a challenging place to operate in, especially when it comes to Prop 215 era retail cannabis. And so we had a lot of work. I was employee number one. We scaled up from 1 to 90 in like 18 months, and we opened a second location. And 2017 was that era where I was finding the writing on the wall. Prop 64 passed in 2016. We were trying to implement policy to be compliant at Kind People's. The second location wasn't working. It was the one location paying for both. Very trying times. The leadership at the collective went a very corporate direction. We hired a CFO from Silicon Valley, and she implemented policies that really took away the Kind family vibe. And like one of her first initiatives was to terminate the compassion program, which I inherited. And I was just like getting crushed. You know, it's just, oh, boom, boom, Prop 64 pounding on my soul. And so I actually applied to become a cultivator, and I worked with a local family in Happy Valley. I think in that era, 2017 to 2018 were my early gardens in Happy Valley with this Eismore family. And I got a temporary outdoor cultivation. And that was a weird time because there was like a transition period. So we still were kind of Prop 215, but implementing new policies to be Prop 64. And so there was like end of 2017 and part of 2018 where I was transitioning from working for a group that I poured my heart and soul into, and things changed. And so I went a different direction. Essentially, I kept doing the compassion, but with weed I grew without Kind People's involved. And I was growing a garden at this 80-acre ranch by myself. It was very challenging. And I was doing all the compliance work, and they were just relying on me I was the expert. I knew what to do. They provided the land, which was a huge opportunity. And I'm really grateful for that opportunity. And the crops we had were stunning, but unfortunately it didn't last. It was super hard. Policy and compliance, and cannabis ordinance in the county was really, really not an easy process. I worked with Pat Malo, Jim Coffis, the Green Trade Group, and it kind of fell apart because not enough people could become licensed to have a trade organization. And that was kind of the beginning of the end, is that era, 2017 to 2018. But it enabled me to take the risk and to grow as an individual by growing crops on my own, and trying to become compliant in this new post Prop 64 era. So it's kind of part Kind People's, part self-employed, just hustling, trying to survive.
That's going to put some extra context when you're listening.
Yeah, so kind of building off of that, something that I'm just fascinated with is just actually how hard it is in this modern landscape, you know, post before on being able to actually get a license for cultivation. And, you know, going through that process, could you explain it maybe a little bit more for people who aren't as familiar with it, and also kind of the monetary value associated with it? Because anybody who I've ever explained it to is shocked when hearing actually, you know, the barrier for entry.
Yeah, well, with Valerie, so my experience, local control is a big challenge. So every county has its own ordinance. So you might go, you know, the city of Aromas, for example, you can like cross the street, you're in a new county. You go over here, you know, it's like this kind of interesting intersection of places. And that, in my experience with Santa Cruz, is very challenging. Santa Cruz has a very unique constituency. For example, where I live now is Bonnie Doon, and we're the epitome of the Not in My Backyard coalition. And they just had the NIMBYs, they had such power and sway that they outlawed growing in the Santa Cruz Mountains pretty much altogether. And I think what happened was, in Santa Cruz, we were pushed by default to South County, which is where a lot of industrial agriculture happens. It's where the berries are grown for Driscoll's, a huge, you know, corporation. Like pretty much all, like 60% of the berries of the nation are coming out of Watsonville, almost. Very big industrial ag zone. And putting cannabis, a bioaccumulator, into that area was not really aligned with what I was really set on. This is why it didn't work out in Happy Valley, is we were in a red zone, but because the parcel was 80 acres, there were opportunities for exceptions. But that said, it comes with a big cost. You have to have these environmental reviews. You have to have a lot of stakeholders involved, and part of it is maybe paying for legit plans. Leveling up. We had to become legit operators post 80 years of prohibition, and I think a lot of people didn't know those, the red tape processes of developing a compliant dry space and a place to quarantine genetics. And if you have employees, you need all the things they need, right? Like OSHA, Cal OSHA. It's just, we live in a place, especially in Santa Cruz County, like, so that it kind of compounds on itself. Like California alone is a state known for a lot of regulation and environmental, which I love and appreciate and support. But then when it comes to cannabis, it was a misunderstood crop. I don't even know if we're still considered an agricultural. I'm not sure if we have the same rights as other agricultural.
We do not.
We do not. And so those things can compound on themselves. And then you get to the local ordinance, and then you get to the, we were the red space within that. And every little compression has a cost. And for someone like myself, I was bootstrapping it. I wasn't seeking outside investment. I wasn't trying to bet the farm, literally, like have my dad take a, reverse mortgage on our house or anything. Like, I just worked my butt off and put 10 G's aside here, a couple G's aside there, hustled to make that, tax payment. We were compliant. We were in good standing. We were paying everything we needed to pay. But I think by default, we were just not setting up the garden for success because we were in Watsonville. We weren't going to grow in this industrial part of the county. And there were some cunning things happening that we weren't privy to because it's tricky. Like, politics are very, very, very tricky, especially in a community like Santa Cruz that it's very, think local first. It's a few families to kind of run things, not to say like get Godfather on you, but it kind of is like that. If you look at the boardwalk and some parts of like the big, economic drivers in this community, we're a tourist community. And so there are certain special interests that have more sway in the drafting of policy, and kind of pushed a lot of the cannabis operators either out completely or just to South County. And one thing for your question that I'm not trying to avoid, but the market has changed. The price per pound is very low. And so you can pay, like, the costs are pretty much the same. There has been some flexibility with excise tax. There has been some shifts at a state level, but the cost of compliance is the same, but the price per pound is much less. And so there's just, the margins get slimmer and slimmer. And then it gets to the point where you can't even continue to operate compliantly. It's really sad. And that's like the WAMM situation where we were giving people our licenses and hoping they would either donate to the compassion program or help with the costs or cover costs. And they were just growing lots of weed and not fulfilling their end of the deal. And that was really heartbreaking. And then similarly, we were working with a group in South County. We were in the right zone. We were kind of all systems grow, but then just the cost of trimming, right? You grow 500 pounds, you grow 7,000 plants. You can dry it, you can box it up, but then you have to process it. And it's like, we went to the Emerald Cup. We had a Small Farms Initiative booth. I went to a bulk buyer showcase. Everyone there was from every county in California. And like, there was like 30 farms and 3 buyers in that bulk buyers showcase. So it's just like, it was just dire. It's like, no matter if we did everything right and you still show up and you have everything, all your T's crossed, your I's dotted, you're like, here we go. Here come the buyers. And like 8 hours in, I talked to like 3 guys and none of them were really buying. They were just shopping. And I don't think anyone sold anything that whole weekend. And that's not any one person's fault. I don't know the solution there. And I think there's obviously a lot of backdoor deals happening too, because in the end, people have to make ends meet. And, oh, the branch is broke, 10 pounds out of metric or 100 pounds or whatever. I don't know how it works, but I feel like that's another piece to the puzzle too, is that there's still an illicit market undercutting the compliant operators. And until the regulators and the different ordinances make it accessible to become compliant, like what you're speaking to, if you had a more permissive process to become compliant, maybe that would discourage the illicit culture, but it's really hard to say. And I don't even know if they're doing as good as they used to, because times are hard. I think there's a lot more cannabis available everywhere. Not to say that it's good, but it's, in some ways access is better. So, and less people are going to jail. So there is try to stay positive, but it is uncanny how challenging it is to become a compliant operator. And I think a lot of people are running out of business for that reason.
Well, I do want to let you take a breath here, Christopher, and perhaps wrap it up. It's been almost an hour and a half. You've given so much of your time. Caleb has rejoined us. Caleb, did you have any final comments or give you a chance? Yeah, you can get a chance to actually do anything. So let me give him the last word.
Just a quick question. Can you shout out anyone besides Equilibrium Genetics and Jade Nectar that are stewarding land races for the audience to hear and look up?
Oh man, I love it. There's operators in Southern Oregon, Green Source Gardens, Nicholas and Elizabeth Mahmood. There's Jesse Dodd and his creative collaborator, La Osa. They have a movie called Tending the Garden that I think is very important. Bryce.
He's coming to class.
Oh, wonderful.
And the documentary. And Bryceland Forest Farms will be.
Yeah, I would say Bryceland is another great farm. Moongazer is a great farm. There's Radical Herbs. I mean, pretty much everyone mentioned in that movie. I mean, Jesse is a dear friend of mine. Pride of the Lion Seeds, Daniel in Potter Valley, Mendocino, very special. Heart Rock Mountain Farm, I think is his farm. Silver Dragon Cannabis, another friend of mine. He's David, very special cultivator. In Santa Cruz, I would say Snow High is Snow High Seeds. His name is John. Bodie, I think, is one of the best. I have mixed feelings, to be honest, about Jade Nectar. I would just be transparent there. He wasn't the best to WAMM. He was one of those people that had the WAMM license, and I don't think he really held up to his part of the bargain, but he is a steward of landrace genetics, so I will give him that. And I think I think he does mean well. Of course, Michael of Coastal Seeds. And who else would I suggest? Oh, Mark, Green Chalk Farms, very special person. The boys of Mendo Dope, those guys are, out there with their music and their performance, but I think they really do care about genetics and living soil, and like Mark and his family and his team, I think, are some of my most beloved people. There are people in Santa Cruz that are kind of still, in the shadows. I would say Myers Creek has some interesting genetics that I grew out this year that I was really happy with. Mike Corral's got a lot of amazing landrace. He's not really selling them, but I mean, if you get to know someone, that's the beauty of community, and that's that cannabis connection come full circle, is you can provide seeds. And every time I see some of these friends, it's always nice to hook them up with seeds, and then it's always funny because their pockets are full of seeds to give away too. So that's kind of the gift that keeps on giving, is just every seed is a prayer, every breath is a blessing, and keep on growing.
Wow. Christopher, thank you so much for joining us today. I just, your work has been not just inspirational, but, quite useful for, keeping these stories going, connecting them up with other stories. And I really look forward to, being more in touch with you in the future. And hopefully maybe we can get together and scheme a conversation with Mike Corral
Happy to help in any way, in any endeavor. Everything that you all are doing, I'm so proud of and would love to help. So keep me in mind if you need anything, and we'll keep this going. Absolutely.
For sure. Thank you so much.
Your kind words. It means the world to me. Thank you all.
And we, I just can't say enough. Thank you so much, Christopher. Really appreciate you and your work, and we'll be talking to you soon.
All righty. Likewise. Thank you. Have a good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for growing with Subsistence Crop, a podcast by the Cannabis Studies Lab at Cal Poly Humboldt.